Chapter 3, BB's Baby Brother. Mrs. Jules asked Damien to pass back the homework. BB Gunn waited nervously. Except for art, her grades had not been very good lately. If she didn't start bringing home better grades, her parents said they wouldn't let her stay up past midnight. She did her best artwork after midnight. Damien handed Calvin his homework, then Todd, then Joy. "Where's yours?" asked Calvin. "I don't know," said BB. "Did you do it?" asked Calvin. "Yes, I did it," said BB. "I worked extra hard on it. I hope Mrs. Jules didn't lose it." Damien finished passing out the homework. BB never got hers. "BB, will you come here, please?" said Mrs. Jules. She pushed nervously out of her seat and stood up, and nervously walked to Mrs. Jules' desk. "I did my homework, Mrs. Jules," she said. "Really?" "Yes, I know," said Mrs. Jules. She held BB's homework in her hand. "Whew," BB sighed with relief. "I was afraid you'd lost it." "No, I didn't lose it," Mrs. Jules said sternly. She showed the back of the paper to BB. Someone had written, "Mrs. Jules is as fat as a hippopotamus, and she smells like one too." "I didn't write that," exclaimed BB. "I love the way you smell." Mrs. Jules smiled. "But if you didn't write it, who did?" "Ray," BB instantly replied. "Who's Ray?" "He's my little brother, Ray Gunn. He must have snuck into my room after I was asleep. He's always playing mean tricks on me. He knew how hard I'd worked on my homework." "Well, we'll show Ray," said Mrs. Jules. She gave BB an A+. "There. I don't think he'll try that again." "Thanks," said BB. "You may have a Tootsie Roll Pop, too," said Mrs. Jules. BB took a Tootsie Roll Pop out of the coffee can on Mrs. Jules' desk, then returned to her seat. She proudly showed Calvin her A+. The next day, Mrs. Jules asked Damien to hand back another batch of homework. "How come Damien always gets to do everything?" griped Kathy. "I'm sorry, Kathy," said Mrs. Jules. "Would you like to pass the homework back?" "No," grumped Kathy. "I'm not your slave." Damien passed out the homework. Again, BB didn't get hers. Mrs. Jules called her to her desk. On the back of her homework, someone had written, "Mrs. Jules has a head full of oatmeal, and it leaks out her ears." "I didn't write it," said BB. "Ray?" asked Mrs. Jules. BB nodded. "Why don't you start checking the back of your homework?" suggested Mrs. Jules. "I did when I woke up," said BB. "He must have done it after breakfast while I was brushing my teeth." "We had oatmeal for breakfast." She shook her head. "I won't brush my teeth anymore." "You have to brush your teeth," said Mrs. Jules. "My parents think he's such a little angel," BB complained. "He's always wrecking things, and then I'm always the one who gets in trouble." "Why can't you be more like Ray?" they say. "Yesterday, he threw all my underwear out the window. Then my mother yelled at me for it. She wouldn't believe that her little darling son would do something like that." Mrs. Jules gave BB another A+ and another Tootsie Roll Pop. For Friday, everyone had to write a report and read it to the class. BB wrote her report about George Washington. She stood at the front of the room and read it out loud. George Washington never told a lie. Not like Mrs. Jules. She lies all the time. That's why her nose is so big, and she snores when she sleeps, so Mr. Jules has to wear earplugs. Everyone was laughing. BB stopped reading. "What's so funny?" she asked. "Come here," said Mrs. Jules. BB shrugged, then walked to Mrs. Jules' desk. Mrs. Jules showed her what she had just read. "Did I just read that out loud?" BB asked. Mrs. Jules nodded. "I was just reading it," BB explained. "I wasn't listening." "It was Ray again, wasn't it?" asked Mrs. Jules. "Had to be," said BB. "Yesterday, he put toothpaste in my socks. Then my mother got mad at me for making a mess and wasting toothpaste." BB got an A+ on her report and another Tootsie Roll Pop. After school, Mrs. Jules called BB's mother on the phone. "Hello, Mrs. Gunn. This is Mrs. Jules from Wayside School." "What's BB done now?" asked Mrs. Gunn. "BB hasn't done anything wrong," said Mrs. Jules. "She's a wonderful girl." "Well, that's a surprise," said Mrs. Gunn. "She's always causing trouble at home." "I wanted to talk to you about that," said Mrs. Jules. "I think you're being unfair to Bibi. I think she often gets into trouble when really Ray is to blame." "Ray?" asked Mrs. Gunn. "Yes, I know you think he's a perfect angel," said Mrs. Jules, "but some children can be angels on the outside and devils underneath." "Yes, that sounds like Bibi," said Mrs. Gunn. "I'm not talking about Bibi, I'm talking about Ray." "Ray?" asked Bibi's mother. "Who's Ray?" And that's the end.